The negative C. For everyone who has stood at low tide and felt, briefly, the weight of what the sea was forced to give back. A quick word before we begin. This channel is small, and that means every subscribe and every comment is a real signal someone wanted more stories like this. Not a metric, a person. So if the next 2 hours land for you, those are the kindest things you can leave. A like helps the algorithm find the next listener who needs a story tonight. A subscribe brings the next one to you when it's ready. And a comment, even one line about what stayed with you, is honestly how I decide what to write next. All right, settle in. Lights out if you have them. 6 months before the line broke at the edge of the belt, a 2-person Elant scout was on station near Saturn. The scout's name was Cradle 8, and her crew were Mira Yoss and Ben Patterson. They were watching an automated regolith sieve called Sieve 19, 400,000 kilometers off their port side, because their orders, as orders sometimes are, made very little sense and would not be explained. Yoss was on the optics. Patterson was reading a paper book and drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The shift had been quiet for 40 days. "Mira," Patterson said, "I see it." The platform did not flash. There was no fire, no expanding cloud of debris, no pressure wave through the optics. The central tower of Sieve 19, which had been there a quarter of a second ago, was simply not there now. In its place was a perfect circular hollow, 200 meters across, neat as a coin punched out of paper. The metal at the rim had been pulled into curling shapes Yoss could not name. Frost glittered along the inner edge. Through the hollow, behind the platform, she could see stars. "What did that?" Patterson said, in the voice of a man who already knew his sentence had no answer. Yoss flipped the optics to wide. Nothing else in the volume of space had changed. No incoming track, no propellant signature, no thermal bloom anywhere within the sensor's reach. The platform's outer ring kept turning. Its docking lights kept blinking. It seemed not to have noticed that its own center was missing. The gravitometer pinged. Yoss looked at it, because it was an instrument that almost never spoke. The reading was small, but unambiguous. A perturbation of about 14 micro-Gs, propagating outward from a 0.8 million kilometers away. Empty space. Not the platform, not anywhere a thing should be. "Ben," she said, "I need you on the comm." He was already moving. She heard the patch fire up behind her, the wideband send that would punch their telemetry back to the analyst chain at Mars in just under 23 minutes. Patterson's hands were steady on the keys. He had a young face, but old fingers. "Sending now," he said. "What do I tell them it is?" "Tell them what we saw. Tell them where the gravity went." "That isn't a sentence, Mira." "Then make one." He did. He spent 90 seconds making one. He was finishing the line that read, "The matter has been removed, but the universe is still paying for it," when the second hollow opened, this one through Cradle 8, and the question of what to call the weapon that had killed them passed out of their hands. Their telemetry reached Mars on schedule. It moved through the analyst chain over the following weeks until, on a quiet evening, it arrived on the desk of an admiral who recognized at once what she was reading, because she had been waiting, in her bones, for years to be told it. Her name was Sera Vale. Chapter 1. The Cost Ledger. 3 months before the Lodestone would put her bow toward the inbound vector and stop, Admiral Sera Vale was sitting across a small steel table from Dr. Renata Brun in the wardroom of an unfinished orbital station above Triton. The wardroom was unheated. The station was a project that had been started in better years and not quite finished, and the heat plant in this section was in a low-maintenance cycle that no one was going to take it out of for an admiral. The two of them were dressed in service jackets over their working uniforms and were drinking tea that was not quite hot anymore. The bulkheads were the color of unpainted aluminum. Somewhere down the corridor, a pump worked through its cycle, slow and patient, like a cow chewing. Brune had a paper notebook open on the table between them. She was not the sort of physicist who liked tablets. She had a wood pencil, mechanical, with an eraser she kept biting in absent moments, and on the page in front of her, she had drawn a small box. "This is the absence charge," she said, tapping the box. Inside the box is a region of negative energy density. The Heshkar can hold it stable for, we believe, somewhere between 9 and 12 nanoseconds. They project it into a target volume. Any normal matter that finds itself inside the box loses its permission to extend in space. There is no flash because there is no energy release. There is no shock wave because the box does not push. There is, if you'll forgive me, a very polite removal. "Where does the matter go?" Sera said. "That is the wrong question, Admiral. Matter doesn't go anywhere. It stops. It is decoupled, briefly, from the conditions under which it can occupy space. Then the box closes. The conditions are restored, but the matter has already failed to be there, and the universe goes on without it." "Where does the energy go?" "That," Brune said, "is the right question." She drew a second box, larger around the first. Negative energy is not free. To hold it for 9 nanoseconds inside their projection, the Heshkar are paying. They are paying somewhere outside the projection, in positive energy. Mostly, near as we can tell, this comes out as gravity. Their drive bubbles do this too, on a smaller scale. The drive bubbles bend the little space-time here, and pay back the bending in a thinner gravitational tail somewhere out behind them. You can see it in the data we got from Saturn. The shot took the central tower of Civ 19. The compensating perturbation propagated outward from a point 8 million kilometers away. Why 8 million? That is also the right question. Brune's mouth did a thing that was almost a smile. "I do not know. The Heshkar do. There is a calculation they perform, an aiming, that places the compensating gravitational point somewhere that does not bother them. Open space, far from anything they care about. Possibly random, possibly chosen. Either way, far enough that they will not notice it. And if they cannot place it far enough..." Brune looked at her. "Now we are working. Tell me what happens. If a ship were to fire many absence charges into a volume of space, and the volume were chosen so that the compensating points fell inside or near the volume rather than far from it, the gravity those points produced would begin to compound. One shot is 14 micro-Gs at distance, negligible. 200 shots, if the points overlap, is not negligible. 2,000 shots, if the points overlap and reinforce, is in another category entirely. The local spacetime would begin to have more curvature than the Heshkar drive bubbles are designed to handle. Their drives would fail. Their drives would not fail. Their drives would refuse. The bubble cannot maintain its smoothness if the local manifold is too rough. It is, mathematically, like trying to lay down a smooth carpet on a floor that is changing shape under it. The bubble decompiles. The ship surfaces. Surfaces? Their ships are not really in our space when they are inside their bubbles. Not exactly. The bubble offsets them slightly. We can hit them only when they decompile to fire. For a few hundred milliseconds, at the moment of discharge, they have to put the gun outside the bubble. That is when our fire control finds them. If they cannot maintain the bubble at all, they are simply with us, visible, vulnerable. Sera looked at the box drawn inside the box. She looked at it for a long time. Brune did not fill the silence. Brune, in Sera's experience, never filled a silence. She let one sit in front of her until the person on the other side of the table had finished doing whatever they needed to do with it. "How many shots?" Sera said. "Working margin?" "Working margin." Brune ran her pencil down a column of numbers Sera could not read. "If we can lure their fleet into firing inside a volume of, say, 60,000 cubic kilometers, with the compensating points falling inside or adjacent to that volume, which, with proper geometry, we can probably engineer, the working number is around 400 shots. How many of their ships? 40, maybe 45. We have estimated their full strength. 10 shots per ship. Roughly. That's a fight we can make them have. "Admiral," Brune said, "I want to be very clear with you. I am estimating the working number from incomplete data. The threshold may be 300 shots. It may be 600. It may be more. The way to know is to be there when it happens. To be there with sensors. To be there with sensors. The sensors will tell us how the curvature is climbing, and we will know, from the climb, when the threshold is going to come." Buoys. Buoys. Many. Spread through a volume large enough to give us spatial coverage. Where would you put them? Brune reached for a star map she had folded into her notebook. She unfolded it and laid it on the table with the side of her hand. "Here," she said, and put her pencil tip on a thin band of small bodies running along the local ecliptic at the edge of the belt. On the inbound vector, their analysts believed the Heshkar fleet was likely to take. An ice field. Comets and small bodies, 80,000 of them, drifting at solar relative velocities. The buoys can latch to the ice, hide their thermal signatures in the body's own thermal noise, run a low-power passive sense, and report back through quantum repeater pairs we have already qualified. The Heshkar will not see them. The ice field is so cluttered and so cold that to their sensors it should look like noise. And the volume. The volume defines itself. The ice field is roughly the volume we need, 60,000 cubic kilometers, give or take, in a slab that runs through the middle of their probable approach lane. Sera looked at the band of small bodies on the map for a long, quiet moment. "You were telling me," she said, "that I can hold them in this volume by parking my fleet on the inside of it." "Yes, Admiral." "And that the Heshkar will engage by firing absence charges into my fleet." "Yes." "And that they will fire, by your estimate, 400 times before their drives begin to misbehave." "Yes." "And that I will lose, in those 400 shots, every ship in my task force." "Most of them. Probably all of them. Yes." "And the civilian arcs." Brune was a long second answering this. "Admiral," she said, "if we let them fire long enough to break their bubbles, the gravitational debt may, depending on geometry, also reach the civilian arcs. I am still modeling that. I do not yet know." "Find out." "Yes, Admiral." "That is not a small thing to find out, Doctor." "I know." "How long?" "I will know more in a month. I will not know everything. There will still be variables we cannot test until the engagement is happening." "A month," A month. Sera was quiet for a while. The pump down the corridor finished its cycle and started another one. She drank what was left of her tea, which was now lukewarm, and she set the cup down in a precise, considered way. The way someone sets down the last cup of tea they will drink in a particular room. "In a month," she said, "I will have buoys ordered and on station, and a fleet trimmed into the right line, and orders cut for an evacuation we have not yet announced. In a month, Doctor, you and I will have committed several million people to a battle plan that may save them or kill them." "Yes, Admiral." "I will need," Sera said, "your model. I will need your numbers. I will need them every day until we are in that ice field. I will need them every hour after we arrive. I will need them, Doctor, when I am dying." Brune nodded. She closed her notebook. She did not put down the pencil. Sera stood up. The wardroom was very cold. She buttoned the top button of her service jacket and went out into the corridor and walked slowly past a viewport, where the unfinished station spine reached up into a sky still full of stars. In the weeks that followed, she ordered the buoys. There were 120 of them in the first lot, low-power passive units built around a quantum repeater pair and a gravimeter, sensitive enough to register a fly's footstep at a meter, which in deep space meant it could register what Brune had taught her to call the universe paying its bills. They were the size of a coffee tin. Each one had a small magnetic foot that would clamp it to a body of ice, and a small heater that would keep its electronics alive in the cold, hidden inside the thermal noise of the body it rode. Sera signed the order for them at her desk on a Tuesday evening, and she signed the order for the second lot of 80 on a Thursday. And on a Sunday, she sat in a briefing room with a tug squadron commander named Voss, and walked him through an operation that did not exist on any record he was permitted to keep. Voss, who had laid minefields off Ceres and ice nets in the Saturn Shepherd lanes, and, in a former life, fishing buoys in the Bering Sea, looked at her star map and looked at her and said, "Admiral, this is fishing." She said, "Yes, Lieutenant Commander, it is." She ordered the manifests reviewed. There were 43 civilian arcs in the rear area column, and they carried between them 3,112,441 souls, of whom 860,000 were children. She read the manifests on a tablet at her desk, slowly, all the way through. She did not skim. She read, as she had once read crew rolls before the funerals of officers she had ordered into action, every name. It took her 4 nights. She did it because she had decided that if the geometry slipped and the gravitational debt reached the arcs, she would not be a person who had killed 3 million people whose names she had not bothered to know. She trimmed the fleet. The task force she would take into the ice field was 11 warships, Lodestone at its center, the heavy cruiser Pasternak on her starboard wing, under a captain Sera had served with 28 years ago, 2 more cruisers, 6 destroyers, and the science-rated frigate Wren. The line was small. The line was correct. A larger force would not have helped. It would only have added shots for the Heshkar to fire, and ships for them to fire at. Sera had cut the order list by hand, ship by ship, and had carried it to her staff with the unhurried, terrible patience of a woman who had been cutting lists like this in her head, in fragments, for years. At the end of the second month, she boarded the Lodestone at her dock above Triton and walked her bridge. The Lodestone was a dreadnought of the Outer Rim Defense Command, 1,100 meters long, painted in the white and gunmetal stripes of the rear guard, and her bridge smelled, the way the bridges of long-built ships always smell, of warm electronics and lemon polish. Captain Edward Holloway met her at the bridge hatch with a coffee he had remembered she took black, and he stood beside her in the still, formal quiet that bridge crews maintained when an admiral first came aboard, while she walked the consoles and met the people who would be on them. Lieutenant Commander Tomek Dravek was on tactical. Lean, dark-eyed, the son of someone Sera had worked under and admired in the early years. Brune was on the science board, the same paper notebook tucked under her arm. Ito was on comms, a thin, careful woman who had run encrypted traffic out of 3 different theaters and had never lost a packet she did not mean to lose. A junior tactical officer named Fierro was at his console, looking very young and very serious. Sera spoke to each of them by name. She told them what she could tell them, which was enough. She told them where they would be on station, which was the edge of the Kuiper Belt, at a vector their long-range plot had been quietly resolving for weeks. And she told them that they would be fighting an action whose shape would surprise them, in a way they would not be able to discuss with their families afterward, which was a sentence she watched land on each of them and saw each of them accept in turn. They were her people. They had been her people for a long time. She did not ask them whether they were ready. She knew they were. The Lodestone slipped her dock at Triton on the evening of the 83rd day. She made her transit out to station in 9 days, with the rest of the task force forming up around her along the way. Pasternak taking up her starboard wing on the 4th day, the Wren sliding into her position on the science line on the 7th. And on the 10th morning, ship time, the line came up to its mark at the edge of the ice field and stopped. The buoys had been laid 2 weeks earlier by Voss's tugs and were already on station, clamped to bodies of ice, their heaters running, their gravimeters listening to a volume of space that did not yet have anything in it worth listening for. Sera took her chair on the Lodestone's bridge. She looked, through the long forward viewport, at the band of small, dark bodies running along the local ecliptic to port. From this distance, the ice field was a faint smudge of dust against the deeper black. She could not see the buoys. The buoys could only be heard. They were murmuring to her console at the science board now, a low telemetry whisper that she could not read, but that Brune could. And Brune's hands were on her keys, with the calm of a woman listening to a piano she had tuned herself. The Heshkar fleet was 48 hours out. The plot at Tactical had it as a clean line of returns, 47 of them, riding at a vector that would bring them through the ice field on a course Brune had drawn with a wood pencil on a paper notebook 3 months ago in a cold room above Triton. Sera sat with her hands on the arms of her chair and watched the ice field. And the ice field, through its 120 small whispering instruments, watched back. Chapter 2. Lodestone. The cruiser Pasternak died without making a sound, and Admiral Sera Vale watched it. The bridge of the dreadnought Lodestone was rigged for combat, full lighting cut, screens stepped down to amber, every console at its lowest comfortable brightness, so the crew could see what was happening outside the ship through the long forward viewport without losing their night eyes. Most of the bridge was a dim, ember-lit room of breathing people, instruments murmuring to themselves at half volume. The Pasternak hung in the viewport like a pier. Her hull was dressed in the white and gunmetal stripes of the Outer Rim Defense Command, and Sera had been able to read her hull number, DDG-41, in the grain-white reflective paint on her port flank. Sera had served with the Pasternak's captain 28 years ago. His name was Eugen Lashkov, and he had a habit of biting the cap of his pen when he was thinking. The first absence charge took the Pasternak through the central two-thirds of her hull. There was no flash. There was no expansion. The middle of the cruiser simply stopped being where it had been, and what was left of her bow and her stern hung in space at the ends of a perfect circular hollow, frost-rimmed at the rim, 150 meters across. Stars were visible through the wound. A small, coherent piece of one of her gun batteries had been pulled by whatever had taken the rest of her into a shape Sera could not categorize, and which her mind, looking at it, refused to file. The shape was the worst thing she had ever seen, because it was geometric, not chaotic. Something in the universe had designed it. For a moment the bridge was as silent as the cruiser. Then Captain Edward Holloway said, very quietly, "Lord." Holloway was the Lodestone's captain. He was a square-built man in his middle 50s, with a beard he kept too short to look like a beard, and he had been Sera's friend for 19 years. He was standing one step behind and to the left of her command chair, where captains stand when admirals are aboard, and his hand had come to rest on the back of her chair without him noticing it do so. She did not move it. "Tactical," she said. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Commander Tomek Drevek from the tactical console. He had both palms flat on his console and his shoulders very still. "Confirm the Pasternak is gone." He had to clear his throat once. "Confirmed, Admiral. Sensor returns are consistent with a discharge of one of their absence charges. Central impact, full transverse traversal. The bow and stern sections are still on station." He paused. "I have no thermal signature anywhere on the wound. The edges are below ambient." "How below ambient?" "Below ambient, Admiral. The metal at the rim of the hollow is colder than the dark side of Pluto." Holloway said, "Comms, hail the Pasternak." "No, Captain," Sera said. "Don't." He did not argue. He nodded once. Holloway had not been wrong. It was the right reflex. Reaching for a friend was a thing that crews did. But she could not afford for the crew to spend the next 30 seconds listening to a comm that no one was going to answer. She needed them to stay on the bridge they were standing on, not on the deck of a ship that had just been turned into geometry. "Dr. Brune," she said, "on the science board, what did you see?" Brune's hands were already moving. She had a small, very white head of hair pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck, and her console was tied into Drevek's, both of them watching the same data through different lenses. "I saw," she said, "exactly what we expected to see, Admiral. The shot was discharged from the lead Heshkar dreadnought. The geometry of the absence is consistent with the simulations we ran in March. The thermal profile is consistent with the simulations we ran in March. The frost," she paused. "The frost on the wound rim. I did not predict that. The boundary layer must be cooling faster than the bulk metal can equilibrate. Note that for the log." "Noted." "The buoys." Brune glanced sideways at her board. "The buoys," she said, "registered a perturbation 47 seconds before the absence charge fired." Sera looked at her. 47 seconds, Doctor." 47.3. The perturbation propagated outward from the ice field, not from the Heshkar fleet. It was small. It was real. So the universe prepaid the debt. The universe began paying the debt 47 seconds before the shot was actually discharged. The mechanism is what we hypothesized in the wardroom in March. The gravitational compensation is non-local in time as well as space. "Tomek," Sera said. Drevek's head was already up. "Admiral." "Did you log that?" "I logged it, Admiral. I I have it as instrument drift in my notes. I have not yet stamped it as battle data. Stamp it. Stamp every reading the buoys send you for the rest of this engagement. Treat them as primary sensors. Yes, Admiral. She let her gaze return to the viewport. The wound through the Pasternak was already beginning to fill with debris from inside the ship. Small things, flares of ejected atmosphere, an emergency strobe still pulsing on the inner hull. Some of the people on the Pasternak had survived. Some of them were going to live for a few more minutes. She was not going to spend any of those minutes saluting them. She would do it later, if there was a later. All hands, the bridge, she said, low. Pre-action stations. Fire control on hold. Repeat, fire control on hold. Holloway's eyebrows did a single, contained thing. He passed the order down through his own chain. The bridge straightened. Below them, deeper in the ship, gun crews stopped shifting their feet on their pedals and began shifting them again, this time without firing. The Heshkar fleet was visible in the long forward viewport at the edge of optics. They were close enough to count, and that was the worst thing about them. There were 19 ships in the line that had hit the Pasternak, and behind that line another 28, and behind that line a smear of smaller craft in numbers Dravik's console refused to estimate. Each Heshkar ship sat inside a faint, almost translucent envelope, a place where the stars behind the envelope did not quite line up with the stars beside it. The envelopes were the negative energy bubbles their drives generated. From the Lodestone's bridge, they looked like dents in space, wet, glassy, very small, very calm. The fleet had come around the rim of the Kuiper Belt at a vector no one had predicted. They were 3 days burn from the rear area arcs, where 43 civilian ships were running for hidden comet habitats with what was left of the colonies and the children of the colonies, and 3,000 rescue workers who had volunteered to ride them out. There was nothing between the arcs and the Heshkar except the 11 warships of Sera Vale's task force, the ice field she had seeded 3 months ago with 120 sensor buoys, and Sera herself. Lieutenant Fierro at his console said, "Admiral, permission to recommend a fallback." "Stated for the log, Lieutenant," she said gently. "Recommendation noted. Denied." "Yes, Admiral." "We're going to fight here." "Yes, Admiral." "Hold the line." Fierro saluted, the small, formal salute of a young officer not yet sure whether his admiral was a hero or a corpse. Sera returned it with the same grade of formality, which was the courtesy she could spare him. He went back to his console. She did not move from her chair. The Pasternak was beginning, slowly, to tumble. The two halves of her hull, no longer joined by the section that had been in the middle, were drifting in opposite, slow rotations around their own centers of mass. The forward half had its bow up. The aft half had its engines trailing. Stars wheeled past the gap between them. Sera made herself watch all of it. She had ordered Eugen Lashkov to that station 4 months ago. She owed him the courtesy of seeing what her order had cost him. When the slow rotation had advanced through about 30 degrees, she let her eyes go past the Pasternak to the ice field that lay beyond the task force's port flank. The ice field did not look like much from this distance. It was a band of dark bodies, perhaps 80,000 of them, none larger than a small city block, drifting along the local ecliptic in a loose, slow swarm. From where she sat, The swarm looked like a faint smudge of dust against the deeper black. The buoys she had seated among them were too small and too dark to be visible at this range. They could only be heard. They had begun speaking 47 seconds before the Pasternak died, and they had not stopped since. "Brune," she said. "Admiral, do you have the math?" There was a small, real pause. "I have most of it, Admiral. I have enough to know the shape of it. I do not yet have the threshold. We will only know what the threshold is once we approach it." "That's fine. Give me a working margin." "I can give you a working margin in 20 minutes, maybe in 30. The buoys are telling me how fast the readings climb. I will know the rate of climb before I know the limit." 20 minutes is fine, Doctor. 20 minutes is what we have." She looked at the ice field. The Heshkar fleet was out there too, of course. But the Heshkar were not what she was looking at. She was looking at the dark band of small bodies that her task force was about to die inside, very slowly, as a way of forcing 47 ships of an alien navy to do mathematics they did not know they were doing. Holloway said, quietly enough that only she heard him, "Sera. Edward. Are you all right?" "I am working, Edward. I am not all right. Is the ship ready?" "The ship is ready." "Then I am all right enough. Light it up." The bridge came up to action. Below them, the Lodestone's gun crews stopped pretending to pretend. Above them, the Heshkar fire rate began, slowly, beautifully, to climb. Chapter 3. The Mercy Argument. 90 seconds after the Pasternak was opened, the Lodestone's task force lost the destroyer Corellia and the heavy cruiser Bowl. They lost them differently. The Corellia took an absence charge through the keel and broke into 3 sections that drifted apart on 3 different vectors. The Bowl took her wound off the starboard quarter in the engineering spaces, and her main reactor, which had been a working device 15 seconds ago, was now a perfectly circular volume of empty space, surrounded by 150 meters of ship. She held atmosphere for almost a minute. Sera watched her rear emergency lights pulse and then fade as her batteries drained out into a void that did not store charge. The bridge of the Lodestone did not panic. The bridge crew were professionals. The bridge crew were also human beings, and Sera could feel, without looking, the temperature of their attention shifting. People who fight for a living can tell when they are losing without anyone telling them. "Admiral," Captain Holloway's voice was low and even. "May I speak?" "Speak, Edward." He came around to the front of her chair so she could see his face. He did this deliberately. He wanted her to read him. "They are cutting us down, Admiral. We have not fired our forward batteries. We have not committed our starboard line. The line is bleeding without firing back. I am going to recommend, in the next 30 seconds, that you authorize a fighting retreat." "Stated for the log, Captain." "Permission to recommend, Admiral?" "Recommend." "I recommend a fighting retreat. We pull along the local ecliptic toward the inner system. We deploy decoys. We bleed them by attrition while we relocate. We re-engage from a position of better cover." "Permission noted, Captain." She did not answer the recommendation. He waited 4 seconds, which was the courtesy he owed her, and then he stepped back and nodded once, because he had also expected her not to answer. He understood her well enough. "Brune," she said. "Admiral?" Tell me what the buoys are telling us." Dr. Brune did not lift her head from her console. Her white hair had come a little loose from its knot. She was watching her readout with the level focus of a woman reading her own diagnosis. "Admiral, the buoys are reporting 22 compensating perturbations since engagement, each consistent in shape, each propagating outward from a point inside or adjacent to the ice field. The aggregate sums coherently. I have my rate of climb. I do not yet have the threshold. Are you in a position to give me a margin?" "In about 15 minutes, Admiral, I will have a real margin. What I have now is intuition." "Use it." "My intuition says 400 shots, plus or minus 150. We are at 22. 22 of 400. Yes. How long do 22 shots take at this rate?" 90 seconds. The rate is climbing. They are firing more often as we hold. They are firing more often because we are not retreating. Yes, Admiral. She let her eyes go to Lieutenant Commander Dravik. Dravik had been working without speaking since the bull died. He was not a man to interrupt. He waited until she looked at him before he spoke. "Admiral," he said, "I have 2 readings I want to bring to your attention." "Tomek?" "The first reading is that the Lodestone's inertial platform has begun to register a small lateral pull. It is presently 14 thousandths of a G. The pull is not coming from the Heshkar fleet. The pull is coming, near as I can tell, from a point inside the ice field. The pull is increasing. It is increasing in line with their fire rate." He took half a second to confirm this. Then he said quietly, "Yes, Admiral." "And the second?" "The second reading is from buoy 371. 371 is parked on a small body about 2,000 kilometers off the Lodestone's starboard. The buoy reports that its host body has begun a slow rotation. It was not rotating 6 minutes ago. It is rotating now." "What is the rotation period?" "Approximately 3,000 seconds. It is slow. It is also, sir, not consistent with any solar tidal or radiative force known to the buoy. The buoy reports it as anomalous." "Tomek." "Admiral?" "You are looking at the consequence of what we are about to do." He looked at her. He had a tactical officer's face, measured, cleared of everything that wasn't useful. He was very young, suddenly. He understood, she could see, that he had just been pulled into a conversation that was not entirely about the engagement in front of them. "Yes, Admiral." "I will need you on this for the rest of the action. I will need you running both lines, the engagement and the buoys. Brune has her math. You have your sensors. You will report to me directly. You will not wait to be asked." "Understood, Admiral." She breathed out. She let her gaze pass across the bridge. Holloway with his hand braced on the back of her chair again. Brune with her white head bent over a column of numbers. Fierro at his console with his salute still recent on his hand. The comms ensign at the back of the bridge, who was a young woman she had not yet spoken to tonight. And a half-dozen others whose faces she knew and whose names she had taken the time, again, to learn. "All hands the bridge," she said. Her voice had its working pitch. "We are committing the line. Forward batteries, free fire. Starboard batteries, free fire. Targeting solution, the lead Heshkar dreadnought and any vessel discharging an absence charge. Fire control, attempt to take them at the moment of discharge. We are not going to break them. We are going to keep them firing." She heard the order go down through Holloway. She heard the Lodestone's heavy guns come up to ready. She heard the cruisers in her line take her command and pass it along. She felt the deck under her feet take, very faintly, the small backward pulse of the Lodestone's forward batteries firing. The bridge came alive in a different way. The crew was working now. They were professionals at work. The temperature of the bridge changed, became colder somehow, more alert. Holloway's hand came off the back of her chair. "Edward," she said. "Admiral, I want you to do whatever you need to do to keep this ship in this volume of space." "Aye, Admiral." "I do not need you to win. I need you to last." "Aye, Admiral." "I need Lodestone to stay where she is. I need the line to stay where it is. I need them to think we have made a mistake." "They will think it, Admiral, because we will look like we have." "Yes, Captain." "Aye, Admiral." He did not, this time, go around to the front of her chair. He stayed where he was, behind her left shoulder. He saluted her where she could not see it, but could feel him doing it. Sera Vale, who had served with Edward Holloway for 19 years and had once shared with him a long, hopeless 3-day silence in a wardroom on the wrong side of a colonial inquiry, returned the salute the same way, without turning. Both of them understood what they had just exchanged. The Heshkar fire rate climbed. The cruiser Yulia, 3 positions out from the Lodestone in the line, took a partial absence through her starboard wing. She did not break, but a third of her was gone, and the rest of her was bleeding atmosphere and trying to keep her engines lit. Sera watched her on tactical. She was still firing. Her captain was a woman named Anya Hartman, and Anya Hartman was, at this moment, doing exactly what Sera had asked her to do. The buoys spoke a little louder. Brune's white head came up. "Admiral," she said, "we're at 31 of 400. Of an estimated 400. Stay on it." "Yes, Admiral." Out beyond the Lodestone's viewport, the field of small, icy bodies, the ledger she had set in her mind, walking down a station corridor in the cold of a night 3 months ago, was beginning, very quietly, to keep accounts. Chapter 4. The Tide Begins. The action ran long, and Sera Vale stood it. 40 minutes is a long time on the bridge of a ship that is being killed in pieces. 40 minutes is also nothing. 40 minutes is the time it takes a coffee to cool in an unheated wardroom, the time it takes the sun, on Earth, to climb a quarter of the way up a winter morning. The Heshkar fired absence charges into Sera's task force for 40 minutes. Her task force fired back into Heshkar fleet bubbles for 40 minutes. The exchange was lopsided in the only direction that mattered. The destroyer Halifax was lost at 12 minutes. She took an absence charge low, threw her aft thrusters, and her bow drifted into the field for 3 more minutes before her remaining crew could be evacuated to the cruiser Pelagia. The cruiser Yulia held longer than Sera had any right to expect. Her captain, Anya Hartman, fought Yulia without her starboard wing for almost 26 minutes before a second absence charge took the section of hull Anya was standing in. The cruiser Pelagia, having taken the Halifax's survivors, took her own absence charge at 19 minutes through the spinal corridor, which was at that moment full of the Halifaxers wounded. Sera made herself watch each one. She could not afford to grieve them. She could afford, she thought, the smaller courtesy of seeing them go. The attack craft she committed at 21 minutes. There were 36 of them, single-pilot fighters from the Lodestones and the Pelagia's hangar decks, and their job was not to win anything. Their job was to attract Heshkar fire and live for as long as they could in the space between the firing. They were not going to live long. She gave the order through Holloway. Holloway gave it through his flight officer. The flight officer was a Major Tanaka, who had argued for the sortie an hour before the engagement began, and who had cried a little quietly in his office when Sera had approved it. The fighters launched in 3 waves of 12. The first wave drew fire and lasted 98 seconds. The second wave learned from the first wave and lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The third wave found a way of weaving through the volume that made it harder for the Heshkar fire control to choose which one of them to dissolve, and the third wave lasted almost 6 minutes. By the time the last fighter lost its permission to remain in space, the buoy's counters had clicked from 47 absence charges fired to 112. Brune was at her console without moving. "Admiral," she said after a long while. "Doctor, I have my rate of climb. I am keeping a running estimate. The current threshold projection is between 320 and 440 shots, depending on how the geometry compounds. I will narrow that as we approach. The relevant fact, Admiral, is that the rate of climb is climbing. The compensation is already nonlinear." Already. Each shot is contributing more than the one before it. We have crossed into the regime where the gravitational debt is reinforcing itself. The aggregate is no longer a sum of small linear terms. Translate. "It means," Brune said, "that we will reach the threshold in fewer shots than we would have predicted from the early data. It also means I cannot tell you exactly how many. The function is steepening." "How fast?" "Steeply enough that the difference between 300 and 400 is increasingly the difference between 1 minute and 20 seconds and 1 minute and 45 seconds. The number is converging. The clock is shorter than the count." "Tomek." Dravik lifted his head. He had a thin sheen on his forehead. The bridge lights were still amber. The viewport was, by now, full of the steady flicker of distant absences and the dim glow of the Lodestone's own batteries firing into the Heshkar bubbles. "Admiral, what is the Lodestone registering?" "The lateral pull is now 81 millig's, Admiral, up from 14 thousandths 12 minutes ago. The pull is no longer purely lateral. There is a vector component drawing us forward into the ice field." "How is the helm responding?" "The helm is compensating. The compensation is taking power. The maneuvering thrusters are presently at 67% of their rated continuous draw." "You are telling me the ship is being pulled into the field?" "I am telling you the ship is being pulled toward the location of the gravitational compensation. That location is presently inside the ice field, 2,000 kilometers off our starboard, and is itself moving. Slowly. I am tracking it." "It's moving?" "The center of compensation is migrating. The compensation is no longer happening at one point. It is being distributed across a region. The region's center of mass is drifting toward the Lodestone." "Edward." Holloway had heard it all. He was standing very still. "Admiral," he said, "maintain station." "Aye, Admiral." "Burn whatever you need to burn to keep us inside this volume. If we leave the volume, the buoys lose their geometry, and Brune's math collapses. We stay. We bleed thrusters." "Aye, Admiral." "Do you have the fuel margin?" "I have presently 3 hours of station keeping at the current draw. If the draw climbs, less." 3 hours is more than I am asking for." "Aye, Admiral." A long pulse of light came across the viewport, distant, whitish, more like the first edge of a sunrise than an explosion. Sera looked at Brune. Brune was already looking at her console. "That was not theirs," Brune said. "That was ours. Captain Hartman's Yulia, the remnant section. Her fusion bottle has gone. How far? About 4,000 kilometers. Did anyone make it off? I do not yet know. Comms. Sera turned slightly. Behind the bridge, at the comm station, the young ensign whose name Sera had not yet had occasion to speak straightened in her seat. Ensign Ito, isn't it? Yes, Admiral. What is your first name? Hana, Admiral. Hana, I'm going to need you in a few minutes for a sealed broadcast. I want you to begin preparing the channel now. I will give you the content when Dr. Brune has the math. Until then, listen for survivor traffic on the sortie band. If anyone made it off the Yulia, I want their names. Yes, Admiral. Begin. Beginning, Admiral. Sera turned back. She looked through the viewport at the ice field, which from the Lodestone's position was a faintly luminous band. Luminous because the absence charges firing through and around her line were lighting the small bodies through some unfamiliar effect, frosting them on their forward faces, brightening their surfaces in a way that had nothing to do with the sun. The ice field was beginning to look, very faintly, like a band of low surf seen from a beach at night. She had committed the line to a battle she could not win, and she was 40 minutes into the battle, and the line was 3 ships shorter, and the buoys were saying she was halfway to where she needed to be in the count, and somewhat closer in the clock, and the Lodestone was being pulled by her own success toward the place where the Heshkar would, in some number of minutes, run out of room to be Heshkar. She let herself, for one breath, take stock. This was the plan working. This was the math she and Brune had begun to build in a wardroom on Triton 3 months ago, and to spreadsheet across a table in the staff cabin of the cruiser Bowl a week later, and to argue down the throats of a dozen analysts in a series of secure rooms at Mars over the course of 2 long visits she had not been allowed to talk about. The plan had said, lure them into the field, force them to fire, let the universe compound their debt, ride the wave of compensation outward, broadcast the timing solution to the arcs, send the civilian ships out of the volume on the same physics that was about to trap the alien fleet. The plan had also said, we will not survive it. She had agreed to that, at the table in the wardroom with Brune, on a night when her tea had gone cold, and the heat plant in that section had been at a low maintenance cycle, and the unfinished station spine had reached up out of the viewport into a sky still full of stars. She had agreed to it with her eyes open. She agreed to it now, again, in the Lodestone's amber-lit bridge, with the Yulia's reactor dying in her viewport, and Hana Ito listening for survivor traffic at the comms board behind her. She had not agreed on that night to what she was beginning to see now in the Lodestone's inertial platform. The pull was not just on her ship. It was on everything in the volume. The buoy on the small body 2,000 kilometers off her starboard was reporting that the body's rotation period had now decreased to 1,400 seconds, and that the body had been joined in its slow rotation by 3 of its neighbors. The ice field was beginning to remember, very slowly, that it was made of objects that had inertia. If those objects were beginning to remember it, then so were the civilian arcs. Brune, she said. Admiral. You promised me something a month ago. Yes, Admiral. I have been working on it. I am not yet ready. How close? Close. Not yet. Hurry. Yes, Admiral. The bridge, around her, did its work. The Heshkar fired. The ice field began, in its small way, to turn. Chapter 5. The Flagship's Ledger. Brun came to her 10 minutes later. She did not call to her over the bridge. She stood up from her console, walked the 11 steps it took to cross the bridge to Sera's chair, and stood at Sera's right hand. Brunn was a small woman. She had to look up. "Admiral," she said. Her voice was very even. "I have it." "Tell me." "Not on the bridge." Sera looked at her once and did not argue. She rose. Holloway, behind her left shoulder, took 1/2 step forward, understood without being told, and held his ground. Sera and Brunn crossed the bridge together to the small alcove at its rear that the original architect of the Lodestone's class had labeled, in his diagrams, the captain's considering place. It was a steel cubby with a door that did not quite close, 2 seats, and a small workboard. The bridge crew had long called it the room. It was not a room. Sera and Brunn went into the room. Sera closed the door, which closed all the way if you pushed it hard, and pushed it hard. "Tell me," she said. Brunn put her notebook on the workboard. She had been keeping it open in front of her on the bridge. Her hands, Sera noticed, were faintly shaking. They were the steady working shake of an aged hand under load, not the shake of fear. "I have run the model," Brunn said, "out 3 more orders of magnitude. And the compensation is not contained by the ice field." "How far?" "It is no longer reasonable to talk about how far. It is reasonable to talk about how much. The aggregate gravitational signature is propagating outward as a coherent perturbation. It is presently small. It is presently survivable. By the time the threshold breaks, it will not be small. And the arcs are approximately 1.5 million kilometers behind the ice field, at a vector of 0.35 from your line. Inside the propagation. Inside the propagation. Sera stood with her hand on the small workboard. The cubby had a low light that flickered, and through the half-closed door she could hear the bridge crew working. Ito's voice reading off a survivor count from the Yulia. 3. The count was 3. 3 out of 931. And Holloway's voice, low, ordering a thruster correction. "How much?" she said. "By the time we have driven their fleet to the threshold, the compensating gravitational field at the position of the theta arc, which is the lead arc and our northernmost, will be on the order of 0.8 Gs, transient, with a vector that is not aligned to the arc's spin axis. 0.8. Transient. Possibly less, possibly more. Their hulls will not take that. Their hulls will not take that. Their crews are belted. Their habitats are spun for 1/3 G. A transient 0.8 in a wrong direction will tear them apart from the inside before the hulls fail. But the hulls will fail also." Sera looked at her. "Doctor, Admiral, I am about to ask you something. I am asking it not as your admiral. I am asking it as your friend." "Ask, Admiral." "Did you know—" "Did I know what?" "Did you know, 3 months ago in the wardroom, that the propagation could reach the arcs?" Brunn did not look away from her. "Admiral," she said, "I knew that it could. I did not know that it would. I did not know 3 months ago what the rate of climb would be. The rate of climb is what tells you whether the propagation is contained or not, and the rate of climb is something you only get from real shots in real space. I have it now. I did not have it then." "You knew it could." "Yes, Admiral." "You did not tell me." "I told you, Admiral, that the gravitational debt might reach the arcs. We agreed I would model it. We agreed I would tell you when I knew. You are telling me now." "I am telling you now." Doctor, Sera said. She stopped. She put her hand flat on the workboard. I am not angry with you. I want that clear. I am asking because I need to know whether I have been a fool. You have been an admiral, Admiral. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Sera looked at her notebook, which was open to a page covered in numbers that meant, beneath their decimal points, the lives of 3 million people. She looked up at Brunn. Brunn's white hair had come further loose from its knot. There was a patch of color, very faint, on each of her cheeks. She was, Sera saw clearly for the first time in 12 years, very old. All right, she said. Tell me how to fix it. Brunn nodded once. She had been waiting, Sera understood, for that sentence. It cannot be fixed, she said. It can be redirected. Redirect. There is a moment, Admiral, when the compensating field reaches a phase coherence. The shots are arriving in a sequence that is now almost regular. The compensation is not arriving at one point. It is arriving as a wave with a definable propagation vector. There will be a moment, at the threshold or just before it, when that wave is most coherent. At that moment, an object riding the wave outward at the right vector takes the wave instead of being broken by it. The wave moves the object. The object survives. Survives because the object is, briefly, in free fall in a field that is itself moving. If the object's drive is at rest at the moment the wave passes through, the object simply translates. The wave does the work. The object does not feel a transient. It feels nothing. It has been, for that fraction of a second, weightless inside a piece of moving space-time. And the geometry has to be right. The geometry has to be exactly right. Vector, phase, drive cut to zero, position within the wave's leading lobe. How well do we know it? By the time the wave is propagating, we will know it within 30 seconds and within 15 kilometers. That is enough, if the arcs receive the data and execute, for them to ride the wave. And the data has to be transmitted in the open, in real time, to every arc, with timing, with vector, with the cut drive command. They have to receive it and execute within seconds of receipt. The wave will not wait. Hana, Sera said, into the bridge, through the not-quite-closed door. Admiral, I will need a sealed broadcast channel, open frequency, highest power the Lodestone can carry. The content will be a timing solution and a vector. Dr. Brunn will give it to you. The channel will go to every arc in the column simultaneously, and we will fire it the moment Dr. Brunn tells us to fire it, and not 1 second sooner. Yes, Admiral. Doctor? Yes, Admiral. Can you give Hana what she needs? I can give her the channel format now. I will give her the timing and vector during the engagement. The latter will not be ready until close to the threshold. I will not have it perfectly. I will have it as well as it can be had. As well as it can be had. Yes, Admiral. Hana, did you hear that? I heard, Admiral. I am preparing the channel. Tell me when you have it ready. Within 5 minutes, Admiral. Sera looked at Brunn. Brunn looked back at her. The cubby, somehow, had become very quiet. Renata, Sera said, in the voice she had used in their wardrooms. Sera, I will need you alive at the threshold. You will have me alive at the threshold, Sera, or you will have my numbers in someone else's hand. Tomek is already most of the way through them. I will give him the rest. Renata, Sera, I am not letting you die ahead of me on this bridge. I am not asking your permission, Sera. She looked at her once more, and Sera saw very clearly now that the patches of color on Renata Brune's cheeks were not the heat of work, but the heat of something else. "All right," Sera said. "All right." She turned and pushed the door of the room open, hard enough that it stayed pushed, and walked back to her chair. The bridge was as she had left it. The Heshkar were firing. The buoys were counting. The Lodestone was holding its station. Behind her, in the room, Renata Brune bent over her notebook and began the work of converting a coherence wave into a sentence Hana Ito could read out loud at the right second. Chapter 6. What the Heshkar Call Mercy. The Heshkar transmission landed at 57 minutes. It came in on the diplomatic band, which the task force had been monitoring since the engagement began, without much expectation of receiving anything. The Heshkar had not been a talkative species. The two prior engagements with them, both at the rim of the belt and both lost, had not produced a single live exchange. The diplomatic band had been kept open out of formal courtesy, and out of the small superstition that to close it would be to give up something the Heshkar, even now, might one day care about. Hana Ito's voice came through Sera's earpiece. "Admiral, I have an inbound on the diplomatic frequency. It is from the lead Heshkar dreadnought. The translation engine is running. Stand by." "Pipe it to me when ready." "Aye, Admiral." It took the engine 2.5 minutes to render the signal. Sera used the time. The Heshkar fire rate had risen to a count of 158 absence charges across the engagement, and Brune, in the room, was working with Drevek to refine the timing model. The light-pulled flicker on the Lodestone's bridge had become almost continuous. The ice field was beginning to glow on its inboard side, with the slow accumulation of small thermal events Sera could not yet name. "Admiral," Ito said, "read it." Ito did not read it. Ito played it. The translation engine was old enough that it did its work in the rhythm of a competent reader, rather than in the smooth flatness of a synth. The voice that came over the bridge speakers was in the engine's default register, neutral and male. But the way the engine paused and broke its sentences carried, across the gap between species, something of the shape of the original. "To the human commander of the line," the voice said, "you are bleeding without firing back. We have observed this. We have considered, among ourselves, the possibility that you intend to die where you stand. We do not desire this. We desire to give you the merciful subtraction. We have given the merciful subtraction to many enemies before you, and we have been told, by those who remained, that it is preferable to the burning. The burning, in our long history, was barbaric. We will not subject you to the burning. We will subject you to one absence each. Your dreadnought first, then the cruisers, then the destroyers. Each crew will not feel the moment of removal. We have studied this. The removal is faster than the nervous system can register. Your crews will go without pain. Your ships will remain as monuments to the courtesy we offer. Surrender. Stand down. Open your bays. Permit us to approach. The merciful subtraction will be issued, in order, ship by ship, with such time between as your families and your records require. We will broadcast the names of your dead. We will not pursue your civilian column. This is the last offer we will make. The next charge will be aimed at your flagship. Reply." The voice stopped. The bridge of the Lodestone did not breathe for almost 5 seconds. Sera let it not breathe. She let the offer sit in the room. "Hana," she said. "Admiral? Pipe that to ship-wide. Now." "Admiral? Ship-wide, Ensign. All decks. Crew berthing, gun decks, engineering, medical, the survivor bays. I want every person on this ship to hear it." "Aye, Admiral." The transmission played again, this time on every speaker on every deck. Sera heard it through her earpiece and through the speakers on the bridge, and dimly through the deck plates beneath her feet. The Lodestone was a large ship, and a transmission piped ship-wide had its own quality, like weather happening in several rooms at once. Sera let it finish. She gave the bridge another 4 seconds. Then she said, into the open channel, with the Lodestone's pickup live, "Hana, open transmit. Diplomatic frequency. Open." "Open, Admiral." She spoke to the bridge first. "This is Admiral Sera Vale, commanding the Rearguard Task Force at the edge of the Kuiper Belt. The transmission you have just heard is from the lead Heshkar dreadnought. The Heshkar have offered us what they call the merciful subtraction. We have heard it. I have ordered it played ship-wide on the Lodestone so that you understand what we are fighting tonight, and what they call kindness." She paused. She let the pickup carry the silence. "They are calling it mercy because they do not, in their long history, understand the distinction between killing a person and erasing one. They believe absence is gentleness. They believe the burning is barbarism. I do not believe these things. I believe they have not learned yet that there is a difference between dying and never having been. I believe we are about to teach them, here, tonight, that there is a difference. The line will hold. We will not stand down. We will not open our bays. We will not surrender the civilian column. The line will hold for as long as the line is a line. And after that, it will hold for as long as any of you are still aboard your ships. And if any of you survive me, you will hold for as long as you can. I am ordering nothing of you that I will not be doing myself in this chair. The Heshkar offer is declined. Their next charge is welcome. Vale, out." "Open closed, Admiral." "Closed, Hana." The bridge was quiet. The Heshkar fire rate, after a pause Brune had not finished noting, climbed. The next absence charge came across the Lodestone's starboard bow. It was fired with a haste Sera had not seen before. It struck the destroyer Oslin, which had been fourth in the line, and took the Oslin through the bridge and the central spine. The Oslin did not finish her death the way the Pasternak had. She did not even drift apart. The two halves of her, freed of each other, simply slowed and stopped where they had been, like a sentence that had broken in the middle of a word. Holloway said, very softly, "Oslin." "Edward." "Aye." "Did you hear what I said over the pickup?" "I heard, Admiral." "Did the crew?" "They heard." "Pass me the gun deck channel." He did. She thumbed it open. "Gun crews, Admiral Vale. The Heshkar are firing harder. That is what we wanted. Keep firing. Keep them firing. Vale, closed." She handed the channel back. Holloway took it. He met her eye. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "Brune," she said to the room. "Admiral." We are at how many? 172, Admiral. The rate of climb has steepened. The threshold will be lower than I previously projected, and we will reach it sooner. I will give you a refined estimate in 5 minutes. How much sooner? Possibly inside the next 20 minutes. Tell Hana. Telling Hana now. Ito's voice from the comms board. Admiral, I have the channel ready. I have content placeholders for the timing and the vector. Dr. Brune will fill them as the moment approaches. Hana. Admiral. You will not fire that broadcast, no matter what happens on this bridge, until Dr. Brune gives you the order. Not until I die. Not until Captain Holloway dies. Not until the bridge dies. Dr. Brune's voice in your earpiece is the only signal you obey. Is that understood? Yes, Admiral, understood. And if Dr. Brune cannot speak? If Dr. Brune cannot speak, Admiral, I have a packet she has prepared for me. The packet contains the signature of the wave's coherence. I am to listen for the buoy's aggregated reading reaching that signature. When I hear it, I am to fire the broadcast immediately on the timing and vector Dr. Brune has loaded into the placeholders. You have a packet. I have a packet. Dr. Brune. Admiral. I asked you, in the room, not to die ahead of me. And I told you, Admiral, that you would have me alive at the threshold, or you would have my numbers in someone else's hand. Hana has the packet. Tomek has the packet. I am alive. The packet is also alive. We are redundant. Yes, Doctor, we are redundant. The Heshkar fire rate climbed. The ice field, beyond the viewport, was now luminous along its full inboard band, the small bodies brightening as the gravitational compensation began to do work on their structure. Some of the bodies were beginning to change shape. The buoys were reporting it. Sera Vale, who had been an admiral for 21 years and a commanding officer for 28, who had served with Eugen Lashkov and Anya Hartman and Edward Holloway and Renata Brune, who had been afraid only twice in her professional life and was being afraid now for the third time, sat in her chair on the bridge of the Lodestone and let the trap she had been preparing for 3 months finish closing on the people she was killing in order to close it. The Heshkar believed, in their long history, that absence was a gentleness. She was about to teach them otherwise, in the only language they had ever been willing to learn. Chapter 7. All is Lost. The Heshkar saw the trap at 67 minutes. Dreivik was the first to register it. He had been keeping one eye on the buoys and one eye on the Heshkar fleet's drive signatures, and at 67 minutes, one of those signatures changed. The third ship in the second Heshkar line, a heavy unit Dreivik had labeled in his notes as Hostile Charlie, dropped its absence charge fire rate to 0. Charlie did not retreat. Charlie did not advance. Charlie simply stopped firing. Admiral. Tomek. Hostile Charlie has gone passive. Last absence charge 27 seconds ago. No new discharge. Drive bubble holding. Position holding. One ship. One ship so far. Sera looked at Brune. Brune was already running the math. Doctor. Admiral. If 3 more of their ships go passive, the rate of climb breaks. We will not reach the threshold. How long do we have? Before others go passive, I do not know. They are observing each other. They have noticed something. They have noticed that we are not retreating despite catastrophic loss. Yes, and that the ones still firing are firing into a volume that is beginning to misbehave. Yes. Edward. Holloway's voice was already in motion. Admiral, take Lodestone out of the line, now. Put us at the head of the line. Take us toward the lead Heshkar dreadnought at maximum thrust. I want their flagship to see us coming. I want their flagship to fire. Aye, Admiral. Helm, sound off. The Lodestone's helm, a man named Arden, whom Sera had not yet had occasion to speak to in this engagement, sounded off. The dreadnought's main drives, which had been on station keeping for an hour and 7 minutes, came up to full burn over the course of 3 seconds. The deck shifted. The amber bridge lights flickered as some part of the ship's power budget reorganized itself. At burn, Admiral. How long to range on the lead dreadnought? At present closure, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. 4 minutes. Aye, Admiral. Edward. Admiral. The other ships of the line will hold their stations. The Lodestone will draw fire. I want every Heshkar ship still firing to fire at us. I want them committed. Aye, Admiral. Brune. Admiral. How many shots? 246. How many to threshold? On current rate of climb, given that Charlie has dropped, somewhere between 300 and 340. We need every Heshkar ship still firing to keep firing for the next 90 to 180 seconds. Yes. Admiral, our maneuver may cause others to drop. Or it may make their flagship press harder. I am betting the latter. On what evidence, Admiral? On the evidence, Doctor, that they have just heard what I said about mercy. Brune did not argue. She nodded once. She returned to her console. The Lodestone charged. She was a dreadnought. She was 470 meters long and carried 11.3 megatons of mass in her hull and her engines and her crew. And when she charged in the way of a ship designed to take fire and put fire downrange in return. Her gun crews opened up at full forward. Sera saw the muzzle flash of her main batteries through the long viewport, brighter than the absence charges had been, almost shocking after an hour of weapons that did not flash. The Heshkar lead dreadnought, hanging in its bubble 4 minutes ahead of the Lodestone's prow, took 11 kinetic rounds across the visible face of its bubble in the first second of the charge. The bubble flexed. 2 of the rounds passed through it at the moment a Heshkar gun decompiled to fire, and one of those 2 rounds struck the gun. The Heshkar lead dreadnought returned fire. The first absence charge came across the Lodestone's port flank. It took the port hangar deck, which was nearly empty after the sortie, and through the hangar deck the auxiliary power conduit. The Lodestone lost a third of her port side lateral thrusters. Holloway compensated. Arden on helm took the correction without breaking stride. That was one, Holloway said. The second absence charge came across the Lodestone's upper structure. It took the dorsal communications array and an emergency mast assembly and a section of the upper crew berthing that had been emptied in the run-up to the engagement. Comms went out across the dorsal channels. Ito, on the bridge, did not lose her primary. The redundant ventral arrays held. That was 2, Holloway said. The third absence charge came through the bridge. Not through the bridge. Through the deck above the bridge. Through the room. It took the rearmost meter of the bridge, the cubby they had called the room, which Brun had been working in, and the ceiling above it, and a small section of the deck above that. It did not take Brun. Brun had stepped, 2 seconds before, out of the room and back to her console on the bridge proper. The hollow, when it opened across the threshold of the room she had been in. It did not strike her. It struck a small section of plating 6 centimeters behind where the heel of her right shoe had been when she crossed it. The bulkhead between the bridge proper and the room ceased to be a bulkhead and became a circular hollow. Atmosphere, on the bridge, ceased to be atmosphere and became wind. The bridge began to vent. Brunn was knocked sideways by the venting and struck the corner of a console. Her white head opened against the console corner. She slid down the console face and came to rest on the deck. Sera saw it happen. She saw exactly how it happened. She saw the corner of the console and the angle of Brunn's head and the way Brunn's hands, which had been very steady on her notebook all evening, opened and let the notebook fall. The bridge sealed itself. The emergency dampers came down on the hollow at the rear bulkhead. The atmospheric vent stopped. The wind died. "Dr. Brunn is down," Holloway said, in the voice of a man calling an event for the log, because that was the voice that came up first, before any other voice. Sera was out of her chair before she registered that she was out of her chair. She crossed the bridge to where Brunn was lying. She knelt. She put her ear to Brunn's mouth. Brunn was breathing, but the breath was not the breath of a person who was going to keep doing it. Brunn's eyes, which had been a clear pale blue when Sera had last looked at them in the cubby, were slightly different colors now in the amber bridge light, and the smaller of the two pupils was not responsive. "Renata." Brunn's lips moved. Her voice came up from somewhere very low. "Tomek. The packet. Tomek. Tomek has it. Tomek has it, Renata. Hana. The packet. Hana has it. Sera. Renata. Don't. Don't fire it early." "I won't, Renata." "Don't." "I won't." She held her hand. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Brunn closed her eyes. Sera stood up. She was aware, distantly, that she was bleeding from a cut along her left temple. She was aware that her left ear was not hearing what her right ear was hearing. She did not look at it. She walked back to her chair, sat down, and did not sit down all the way, because something across her right side did not want to bend. "Holloway. Admiral. Status. We have lost the dorsal comms array, the port hangar, a third of the port lateral thrusters, the rearmost 6 meters of the bridge, the upper crew berthing, the dorsal mast, and 1 auxiliary power conduit. Atmosphere on the bridge is sealed. We have casualties. Dr. Brunn." He stopped. "Dr. Brunn is gone, Admiral." "I know, Edward." "Yes, Admiral." "Tomek." Drevek's voice was not steady. "Admiral. Do you have her packet?" "I have her packet, Admiral." "Do you have her math?" "I have most of her math, Admiral. I am missing the final coherence window calculation. I am working it. I will have it." "How long?" 8 minutes, possibly 6. I am working from where she stopped." 8 minutes. "Yes, Admiral." "Edward." "Admiral." "Hold Lodestone in the line of fire." "Aye, Admiral." "Hold us until Tomek has it." "Aye, Admiral." "Then we hold longer." "Aye, Admiral." The Lodestone held. The Heshkar-led dreadnought, having issued 3 absence charges in succession into her, did not pause to admire the work. It loaded another. The buoys in the ice field were now reporting compensating perturbations on a continuous basis, no longer in discrete events, but as a steady wave that the buoy's instruments were resolving as a single climbing curve. The curve was Brune's curve. Dreivik, at his console, was bent over the version of it she had given him. Sera Vale, bleeding quietly into the captain's chair of the dreadnought Lodestone, listened to the buoy's aggregated reading climb, and did not let herself look at Renata Brune's body, which was 3 meters from her right hand, on the deck of the bridge, with a notebook lying open beside it that no one was reading. Chapter 8. The Broken Lattice. For 3 minutes after Brune died, the Lodestone did her best work of the night. She continued at full burn into the lead Heshkar dreadnought's volume. She fired her main batteries on continuous cycle. Her portside thrusters, working on 2/3 power, kept her line of approach steady enough that her gun control could hold its solution. Her gun crews, who had heard their admiral over the pickup an hour earlier, and had heard the merciful subtraction explained to them in the same broadcast, fired at their stations without slowing. The lead Heshkar dreadnought, in those 3 minutes, fired 4 more absence charges into the Lodestone. The 4th charge took the Lodestone's starboard plasma manifold. A section of her engineering deck lost atmosphere. Her starboard reactor, which had been delivering full power, began to deliver 80% of full power, and then 60%, and then settled at 53%. Her main batteries kept firing on her port reactor. Then, the lead Heshkar dreadnought stopped firing at her. Dreivik saw it on tactical first. He waited 4 seconds before he reported it, because he wanted to be sure. Admiral, hostile Alpha has ceased fire on Lodestone. Last absence charge 8 seconds ago. No new discharge. Drive bubble holding. Position holding. Edward. Admiral, we are still in the line of fire from hostiles Bravo, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, most of the lead line. We are not being targeted by Alpha specifically. We are still drawing fire from her supports. We are at threshold of range for the supports. Tomek. Admiral. Translate Alpha for me. Admiral, hostile Alpha has worked out, I believe, that taking the Lodestone out of the equation finishes the math, but does not unmake what the math has accumulated. They have realized that we are the gravitational beacon of this engagement, and that destroying us does not destroy the lattice. They have also realized, I think, that we are taking absence fire deliberately to keep them firing. So they have stopped firing at us. They are letting their other ships continue while they assess. Their other ships are still firing at us. Yes, they have not been read in. The order was issued in haste. We are still drawing fire. The lattice continues to climb. Brune's curve continues to climb. We are at, Admiral, we are at 291 absence charges. The rate is steepening. I am inside her math. I have her coherence window calculation. I am working the final integration. How long? 4 minutes, possibly less. I will have a window. How wide a window? Approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds. Yes. To fire the broadcast inside an 11-second window. Yes, Admiral. Hana. Admiral. Did you hear that? Yes, Admiral. You are firing the broadcast inside an 11-second window that Tomek will hand you. I am firing the broadcast inside an 11-second window. Yes, Admiral. Edward. Admiral. How is the ship? Holloway did not answer immediately. He took half a second to look at his board. He took another half second because he had, Sera saw, become a man who took half seconds to give honest answers tonight. The ship is dying, Admiral. Her port reactor is at full. Her starboard reactor is at 53% and degrading. We have hull integrity on 3/4 of the ship. The other quarter is open to vacuum or to absence edge geometry that neither I nor my engineers entirely understand. We have lost approximately 40% of the crew by my count, which is rough. We are still firing. Helm is responsive. Maneuvering is at 1/3. Drives are at full. We can fight for some number more minutes. I cannot tell you exactly how many. How many can you guarantee? 6. Tomek needs 4. I need 11 seconds inside that 4. 6 is enough. 6 is enough, Admiral. Edward. Admiral. Thank you for 6 minutes. You are welcome, Admiral. She let her gaze go past him to the viewport. Beyond the Lodestone's prow, the ice field was no longer a band of dark bodies. The ice field was visibly luminous, brighter on its inboard side, brighter still in the volume directly between the Lodestone and the lead Heshkar dreadnought. The small bodies had begun to glow with what Brune's notes had called accumulated tidal stress, the heating of internal structures by gravitational shear. Some of the bodies, Sera saw, were no longer perfectly round. The buoys on those bodies were broadcasting through her remaining ventral channels a steady, climbing chord of small inertial events. She lifted her right hand to her face. Her right hand was steady. Her left side, somewhere, was not. She did not look down. Tomek. Admiral. Tell me what the buoys are seeing. Admiral, Buoy 371's host body has finished one rotation. Buoy 372's host body has now begun to rotate. Buoy 380 is reporting that its host body has begun to translate, approximately 0.3 meters per second, on a vector inbound toward the volume between Lodestone and hostile Alpha. Buoys 411 through 416 are reporting comparable translations. The center of compensation has stabilized. It is approximately 1,200 kilometers off our starboard. It is no longer migrating. It is, however, deepening. Deepening. The well is getting deeper. The compensating field at the center is currently approximately 0.3 Gs, transient, with a confused vector. Buoys are beginning to report tidal effects on their host body's shapes. Some of the smaller bodies are beginning to elongate. How small? 10 meters? 20 meters? The smaller bodies in the volume are beginning to behave as if they are inside a slow tide. A tide. A tide, Admiral. The set-piece image arrived in her like cold water. She had seen it in her head 3 months ago, during an evening at the desk of her quarters on Triton, when she had walked Brune's math forward on her own and tried to picture what the ice field would look like in the moment her plan was working. She had pictured a tide. She had not, 3 months ago, believed her own picture. The picture was now happening. Out beyond the Lodestone's viewport, the ice field was beginning to behave as a body of water behaves under a moon. Hana. Admiral. Read me the broadcast as it is loaded. Reading, Admiral. To all civilian arcs of the rear area column. This is Admiral Sera Vale, aboard the dreadnought Lodestone. To the captains of arcs Theta, Iota, Kappa, Lambda, Mu, Nu, Z, Omicron, Pi, Rho, Sigma, Tau, Upsilon, Phi, Chi, Psi, Omega, and the cargo arcs A through P. You are about to be passed by a coherence wave in local spacetime. The wave is moving outward at the vector that follows. At the timestamp that follows, your drives will cut to 0. Your drives will remain at 0. The wave will translate you. You will not feel the transient. Do not fire the drives. Do not fire the drives. The vector and timestamp are, and there is the placeholder, Admiral, that Dr. Brune and Lieutenant Commander Drevek will fill. Read the closing. The wave will move you outward. Ride it. Do not maneuver. Do not transmit. Do not fire the drives until the wave has passed. This signal is broadcast in the open. The Heshkar will hear it. They will not be able to use it. We are the beacon. We are the beacon. Vale, out. That is the broadcast. That is the broadcast, Admiral. Hana, Admiral, you will say Vale the way I have said it. Yes, Admiral, I will. She let her hand come down to the comm switch on her chair arm. She did not press it. She rested the side of her hand against it, as she had done in drills and in the long hours of preparing for an action, and her fingers settled across the casing of the switch in the way they had settled across the casings of switches all her life. The switch was a small, machined, recessed thing under a plastic guard. She did not lift the guard. She rested her hand on the guard. The bridge worked around her. Holloway ordered another correction. Helm took it. The Heshkar fired absence charges into the rest of the line. The destroyer Tien dissolved across her stern. The cruiser Pelagia, what was left of the Pelagia, took an absence charge and held briefly. The buoys spoke louder. The Icefield's tide came in. Sera Vale, who had spent 3 months walking down corridors picturing what was happening now, sat in the captain's chair of the Lodestone and held the comm switch under her right hand and waited for Brune's curve, climbing through Drevek's console to reach the place where Brune had told her, in a wardroom on Triton, on a cold night, the universe would have to start paying for what it had been allowed to do. Chapter 9. The Negative C. The threshold came at 76 minutes. Drevek gave it to her in 3 words. Admiral, 11 seconds. Hana. Admiral, window. Window opens in 3, 2, 1. Window open. Fire. The Lodestone's ventral comm array, which was the only comm array she had left, opened the diplomatic frequency at full power. Hana Ito's voice, in the cadence Sera had asked for, read the broadcast into the open. The broadcast went to the 17 lettered arcs of the rear area column, and the 16 cargo arcs of the same column, and to anything else in the volume capable of receiving on the diplomatic frequency, which included, as Sera had known when she ordered Ito to use it, the Heshkar. The arcs received it. They had been watching the diplomatic frequency since the engagement had begun. They had been waiting for it. They had been told in their pre-engagement orders that a broadcast would come on this frequency at a moment they could not predict, with content that would override any other order they had received, and that they were to execute the broadcast immediately. They executed it. Across a volume of space 1.5 million kilometers behind the ice field, 33 civilian arcs simultaneously cut their drives to 0. They did not transmit. They did not maneuver. They held station. They cut to dead stick, as the ARC captains had been ordered to call it in their pre-engagement briefings, and waited. The wave came. It came as a slight lifting first, a sense the ARC's inertial platforms reported to their bridges as a brief and gentle acceleration in a direction not aligned to anything. Then it came harder, as a stronger lifting, a sense that something had picked up the arcs, the way a swell picks up a sailing ship, and that the arcs were now riding on something rather than driving themselves. The wave lifted 33 arcs and translated them outward on Brune's vector at a velocity that built smoothly from 0 to 1100 meters per second over the course of 14 seconds. The arcs did not feel the transient because the wave was, for the duration of its passage, the only thing acting on them. The crews experienced the translation as a brief, gentle weightlessness, which was the cleanest sensation any of them had felt since the Heshkar were detected. When the wave passed, the arcs were on a new vector, 1100 meters per second further out from the ice field than they had been. Their drives on standby came back up at the all-clear from each arc's bridge. They did not pursue the wave. They rode the new vector outward, into the dark behind them, on the momentum the wave had given them. The Heshkar fleet, deep inside its own negative energy bubbles, also received the wave. The Heshkar fleet was not riding it. The Heshkar fleet was inside it. The Heshkar drive bubbles, which depended on a smooth manifold of local space-time to maintain their offset, found that the manifold beneath them had begun to disagree with itself. The bubbles, in the language of Brune's wardroom diagrams, had been laying down a smooth carpet on a floor that was now changing shape. The bubbles failed. They did not fail explosively. They did not fail beautifully. They simply ceased to be able to maintain their offset from the local manifold, and the ships inside them surfaced, all at once, into normal space. For the first time since the engagement had begun, the Lodestone's viewport showed Sera Vale the Heshkar fleet. They were the wrong shape. She had expected this in the abstract. Every prior engagement had taught the Navy that Heshkar ships, when surfaced, were strange. But she had not been ready, after 76 minutes of fighting envelopes, for what their actual hulls looked like. Their ships were long, dark, faceted, asymmetric in a way that was deliberate rather than accidental. Their surfaces were not painted but worked, fluted and ridged in patterns that made them difficult to read at any one focal length. They had no windows. They had no light. They hung in the ice field's wash like dark fish brought up from a deep water by an unfamiliar tide. They were also no longer firing. Edward, Admiral, fire everything we have. Aye, Admiral. Gun deck, free fire, all batteries, all targets, forward, port, starboard, anyone with a tube and a round. The Lodestone's gun crews, who had been firing on cycle for an hour and 16 minutes, and had been firing into bubbles they could rarely see and rarely hit, opened up on a fleet of ships they could now see clearly. Across the line, what was left of the cruiser Pelagia and the destroyers TNA and TNC, which were the surviving partial sections of the Tien, still capable of firing, did the same. The 4 ships left of Sera Vale's task force, in the moment the Heshkar surfaced, fired across the volume of the ice field as though they had been waiting for it, which they had. The kinetic rounds traveled across the volume at the speeds they had always traveled. They struck Heshkar hulls that had no bubble around them. The hulls were not designed for kinetic combat. The hulls broke. The Heshkar-led dreadnought, which had stopped firing on the Lodestone 12 minutes earlier in order to assess the engagement, took 11 kinetic rounds across her flank in the first 2 seconds after she surfaced. Her hull plating, fluted and ridged and dark, came apart along the lines of its own work. It was not a surrender. The Heshkar did not surrender. The Heshkar fired their own weapons, but their weapons were absence charges, and absence charges required negative energy bubbles to fire, and their bubbles had failed. They could not fire. They could not run. They could not, in the local manifold of the ice field, do anything they had been built to do. They could, however, hang. They hung. 47 Heshkar ships surfaced into a region of space that no longer cooperated with their drives, hung in the ice field in a slow, beautiful, terrible array. And Sera Vale watched them hang. The ice field around them was not still. The small bodies that had begun to translate at the start of the threshold were now translating in earnest. They were moving in a slow tide. They were moving outward and inward in patterns that Brunn, had she been alive, would have called the breathing of the well. Some of the smaller bodies were elongating into thin filaments. Some were striking the surfaced Heshkar hulls. Each strike opened a small visible flare on those hulls, the first conventional combat the Heshkar had taken in decades. The Lodestone's gun crews kept firing. The remaining ships of the line kept firing. The Heshkar fleet, motionless inside the negative sea its weapons had created, took kinetic fire it could not dodge. Some Heshkar ships broke. Some held. Some, by some inner thrust Sera could not see, began to translate slowly along the tide themselves. But they could not master the translation, and the tide bore them where it bore them. The Lodestone paid for her last act. The Heshkar-led dreadnought, in the moments before her hull broke, fired one last absence charge through the hard coupling between her surfaced gun and the failing remnant of her bubble. The charge was clumsy and short-lived. It traveled erratically, half-blind, across the volume of the ice field, and it took the Lodestone's starboard reactor. The Lodestone's starboard reactor, which had been at 53% for 10 minutes, ceased to be a reactor and became a hollow. The Lodestone lost half her remaining power. Her port reactor, alone, could not hold the gun cycle. Her batteries went silent. Her drives, on what was left of her port-side power, dropped from full to a low maintenance rate. The Lodestone coasted into the volume she had been firing into. She did not turn. She did not maneuver. She rode the tide forward into the ice field, on a vector parallel to the wave that had taken the arcs. Tomek. Admiral. What are we doing? We are riding the wave, Admiral, with the arcs. We are at one of the leading lobes. Edward. Admiral. Drive cut to 0. Aye, Admiral. Drive cut. Helm. Neutral. Hold position. Tomek. Where does the wave take us? Outward, Admiral. With the arcs. On their vector. Our velocity will match theirs as the wave passes. How long? Approximately 14 seconds for the wave to complete its passage through our location. After that, we are a ship coasting. Hana. Admiral. Are the arcs reading? All 33 arcs are reading the wave, Admiral. All 33 arcs are coasting on the new vector. Arc Theta is reporting nominal. Arc Iota is reporting nominal. Arc Kappa is reporting nominal. They are all nominal, Admiral. All of them. All of them. She closed her eyes for one long count. When she opened them, the Lodestone had begun to coast. She was no longer firing. She was no longer maneuvering. She was a ship the size of a small town, moving slowly outward on a vector imposed on her by a wave she had spent 76 minutes engineering. Her port hangar was open to vacuum. Her dorsal mast was gone. Her bridge was bleeding atmosphere through the dampers in slow, controlled releases that would have her atmospheric reserves down to nothing in under an hour. Her starboard reactor was a circular hole. Her port reactor was at nominal. Her gun crews, on the gun decks, were standing at their stations and looking at viewports they no longer had a reason to fire through. The Heshkar fleet hung behind them. The ice field breathed around the Heshkar fleet. The negative sea was a band of luminous, slow-moving small bodies, glowing faintly with the heat of compensation, surrounding 47 dark, fluted hulls that had stopped doing anything. Edouard, Admiral, look at them. He came around to the front of her chair, slowly, because his right hand was holding his left elbow, and his left elbow was not entirely whole. Admiral, that is the negative C. Admiral, they will not get out of it. Their drives cannot work in it. They cannot fire. They cannot run. They are alive in there. They will be alive in there for some time. They will not, however, be going anywhere. Aye, Admiral. This is what we made tonight. Yes, Admiral. She watched the Heshkar fleet. The Heshkar fleet did not move. The ice field moved around them, in patterns Brunn would have wanted to write down. The arcs, behind her, far behind her now, vanished into the dark on a vector outbound from the engagement, and she could not see them in the viewport, but she could read their telemetry on her chair-arm display, where each of the 33 arcs reported, in turn, their drift outward and the rising distance between them and the place she was leaving them. Behind her, in the line, the human lights of her surviving ships, the Pelagia, the Tien sections, the Lodestone herself, coasted on the same wave, drifting outward into the same dark. Sera Vale watched the Heshkar armada hang motionless in the negative sea it had created, and behind her, the human lights vanished into the dark. Chapter 10. Driftwood. Hester Anwar was an engineer on the civilian ark Theta, and the night the line broke at the edge of the belt, she was on the second watch in ark engineering. Theta was the lead ark of the rear area column. She was a long-haul colony transport built 51 years ago for the Saturnian relocation, and she carried, on the night of the engagement, 81,000 civilians from the inner colonies of the belt and 340 rescue workers and a small medical complement. Hester Anwar was one of the medical complement's spouses. She had married Anjali Anwar 14 years ago and had not, until the run-up to the engagement, expected to be on a colony ark on a night that her wife described, in a low voice across the breakfast table, as a night that might go a number of different ways. Hester was on the second watch because she had drawn it in the rotation, and the second watch on Theta was the watch that stood by during action. Theta had been at battle stations for 2.5 hours. Her drives had been at standby. Her crew had been told that an order to cut to dead stick might come through on the diplomatic frequency at any time, and that when the order came, they were to execute it within 4 seconds of the bridge's all clear, and not to fire the drives again until the bridge said so. They had been drilled on this for a week. The order came at 38 minutes past the hour. The voice on the diplomatic frequency was a young woman's voice, calm, with a slight register break in the middle of her sentences that Hester later realized was the cadence of someone reading text she had not herself written. The voice gave the vector and the timestamp and read the cut drive command twice. Theta's captain, a man named Yusuf Reyes, whom Hester knew slightly from the wreck deck, executed the broadcast within 2 seconds. Theta's drives cut. Theta's engineering board, which was the board Hester was watching, went to dead stick. The ark held. Behind the ark, in formation, 16 other lettered arks and 16 cargo arks cut their drives in the same 3 seconds. the column held station. Then the wave came. Heshkar felt it as a small lifting first. The Ark's spin gravity, which was a managed third of a g, did a thing that her inner ear did not have words for. The thing happened a second time, harder. Heshkar held the rail of the engineering board and looked at the inertial display, where the Ark's motion was being represented as a small green vector arrow against a grid. The arrow was lengthening. The Ark was being moved. The motion was very smooth. There was no shudder. The Ark's hull did not creak. The lights did not flicker. The motion was the smoothest acceleration Heshkar had ever felt on a ship. Smoother than any drive cycle. Smoother than any thruster correction. Smoother than the floors at the colony she had grown up on. It was the motion of a thing being lifted by something larger than itself and carried. It lasted, Heshkar later read in the engagement log, 14 seconds. When it stopped, the Ark was on a new vector, 1,100 meters per second further out from the ice field than she had been. The captain's all clear came down 40 seconds later. The drives were brought up to standby. Theta did not maneuver. Theta coasted. Heshkar finished her watch. She did not, during the rest of the watch, fully understand what had happened. She understood that the order had come on the diplomatic frequency. She understood that the order had been transmitted in the open from a source in the engagement zone. She understood that the Ark had cut and held and ridden a thing she could not see. She did not understand, until the bridge replayed the original broadcast on the Ark's internal speakers an hour later, who the voice on the frequency had been, or what they had done to make the wave possible, or what was being asked of the Ark when the broadcast said, "The wave will move you outward. Ride it. Do not maneuver. Do not transmit. Do not fire the drives until the wave has passed." When the broadcast was replayed, Heshkar listened to it the way the 81,000 other people on Theta listened to it, which was without speaking. The voice on the frequency read the broadcast through, including the closing. "We are the beacon. We are the beacon. Vale, out." Captain Reyes, after the replay, came on the Ark-wide channel and said the name of the broadcaster. Admiral Sera Vale, of the Rear Guard Task Force, aboard the dreadnought Lodestone. He read off the names of the other ships of the task force and the ships that had been lost, in the order of their loss. The list took some time. He read the names of the captains. He did not say what had happened to the Lodestone. He did not say what had happened to Admiral Vale. The Ark had not received that information yet. The Ark was a long way out from the engagement zone now, and the engagement zone was, behind them, a place where the diplomatic frequency was no longer broadcasting, because there was no longer a coherent ship to broadcast from. After her watch, Heshkar walked up 4 levels to the observation gallery on Theta's upper spine, which the children on board had been calling, since the colony evacuation began, the porch. The porch had a long, curved viewport that ran the upper third of the spine, and from the porch you could see, in fair weather, most of the sky behind the Ark. The sky behind the Ark was, that night, dark. It was not the dark of empty space. It was the dark of a place where the stars had been, and where now, between Heshkar and the stars, was a volume of space the size of a small region of the ice field, faintly luminous in a way that did not match anything Heshkar had ever seen. The luminosity was uneven, and it was very slow, and it was not centered on any one point. It was, she thought, distributed across a region. It was breathing. She watched the breathing for a while. Other people came up to the porch and stood at the viewport with her. Children came up. Old women came up. The cook for the second shift mess, a man named Tomas, came up and stood with a cup of soup in his hand and did not drink it. After a while, near the center of the breathing region, a small, new light began. It was not a star. It was the wrong color for a star. It was a slow golden, like the color of a candle seen across a long room, and at first Hester thought it was a small, coherent ship moving in the engagement volume. Then she realized that it was not moving. It was, in fact, growing. It grew slowly, over the course of about a minute, from a point too small to see clearly to a slow spreading bloom of golden light that did not have any of the structure of a flame or an explosion. It was just light. It was warm light. It came outward from a place in the ice field, and it traveled slowly, in a way that was nothing like the speed of any explosion Hester had ever seen on a recording. And it eventually washed across the volume of the porch's viewport in a thin, steady wave of warmth. It was, Hester learned much later, the cumulative thermal residue of the Lodestone's port reactor, which had broken open and dumped its remaining heat coherently outward across the volume of the ice field in a final, long emission, scattered and rescattered by the wave-modulated manifold of the negative C, and emerging at last as a single, coherent flush of slow, warm light at the edge of the propagating front. It was a single ship's last warm exhale, made luminous by the geometry of the field she had died inside. Hester did not, at the time, know what it was. She did not know who it was. She knew only that it was warm, and that the warmth lasted for several minutes, and that it was the only warm thing she had seen in a viewport in the past 4 months. She watched it until it faded. Tomas, the cook, who had not drunk his soup, said very quietly, "What was that?" Hester said, "I don't know." She did not say it loudly. She said it the way a person says a thing they intend to hold for a long time. She did not know the name of the woman who had broadcast the wave. She did not know yet that the woman was no longer alive. She did not know yet that she was alive because the woman had decided, in a wardroom on Triton 3 months before, that the cost of saving Hester and her wife and the 81,000 other people on Theta and the 3 million people on the column was a price the woman would personally pay. Hester only knew that the warmth had been a kind of light she had not expected, that it had come from somewhere that had been very dark a few minutes earlier, and that it had reached her. She looked at it for a long time after it had faded. Then, because her shift was over and her wife was waiting, and because life on a long-haul arc continues in the ways life does, she went down 4 levels to her quarters, and she held Angeli for a long time, and she did not, for some hours, talk about what she had seen. Behind her, far behind her now, the negative sea kept the Heshkar fleet, and the Lodestone coasted on the same wave that had taken Theta, drifting outward into the same dark, on the vector Sera Vale had given to all of them. The 33 arcs of the rear area column rode out, into the dark, on the wave of a debt the Heshkar had paid, and never thought, while they were paying it, that anyone had been keeping the books. The record of the engagement at the rim of the small bodies was composed on a Heshkar archive ship by an archivist whose name does not translate into any human language without harming it, and whose work, in their long professional life, had been the formal preservation of certain transitions in their species' history. The record, when it was complete, was the first record in 2,000 of their years to use a word that translates, into our grammar, as war. The record, in our partial reading, contains the following. The fleet that engaged the human line at the rim was not destroyed. The fleet remains, at the time of this composition, in the volume of the engagement, sealed inside the smallness of its bubbles. The bubbles are not failing. The bubbles are merely no longer able to be smooth in a region of the manifold that is no longer smooth. The fleet is alive and slowly drifting on the currents of the field that was made by its own work. The currents are not the currents the Heshkar had asked the universe to provide. They are what the universe has provided in answer to the asking, after the asking had gone on for too long. The record, in our partial reading, also contains the following. The human commander of the line. The human commander of the line had a designation. The designation translates, with effort, as the keeper of the count. The designation was applied by the archivist to a human admiral whose own name the archivist did not learn, but whose voice was preserved on the diplomatic frequency at the moment of the wave's release. The keeper of the count, the record says, did 3 things, in sequence, that the Heshkar had not expected. She did not retreat, when retreat was the only sensible action. She broadcast, at the moment of greatest gravitational coherence, the timing of the wave to the civilians, in the open, knowing the Heshkar would receive it. She herself remained inside the volume, where the wave would also pass through her ship, and she did not order her ship to ride the wave to safety, although she could have. She ordered her ship to remain in the volume, to fire what was left of its guns, and to coast, with the wave, into a place that the wave would also reach. The archivist, in our partial reading, concludes that the keeper of the count chose her people's lives over her own with such mathematical precision that the act, in Heshkar grammar, can only be expressed as the giving of a gift. The grammar, in this place in the record, is silent. The silence is a long silence. Our translation engines, here, declined to render it. The keeper of the count was a human admiral. She is no longer alive. The record, where it ends, leaves the question of what we owe her unanswered, because she did not, in any of her broadcasts, ask for an answer. Thank you for staying through this one. If anything in the last 2 hours stayed with you, a phrase, an image, the shape of the trade Sera made in the wardroom, I would honestly love to hear what it was. The comments are open, and reading them is how I know what kind of story to write next.